How the Sacramento Kings made one of the worst decisions of this generation. The Kings over the years have been known as one of those teams that make a ton of bad decisions, but the decision to pass on Luka Doncic in favor of Marvin Bagley far surpasses any of the poor decisions that they've made in the past. But quickly before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports, I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. The Sacramento Kings are no strangers to poor decisions, from firing head coach Mike Malone to more recently trading away their young promising star player in Tyrese Haliburton. The Kings have made their fair share of poor decisions over the years. But going into the 2018 NBA draft is where the Kings by far made their worst decision. In that year's draft, the Sacramento Kings ended up having the number 2 overall selection and ended up going with Marvin Bagley, who at the time was seen as a phenomenal talent at that power forward position that could do a ton of different things offensively and was seen as a player that would be perfect for the new age NBA. And at the time, the selection of Marvin Bagley was seen as a pretty good selection by a lot of people. But one thing that I will say is there was a decent portion of people that thought Luka Doncic should have went with the number 1 overall selection, so of course the fact that he didn't even go with the number 2 overall selection was seen as a bad move by a certain portion of fans. And pretty early on into the rookie seasons, it was pretty apparent that the Sacramento Kings made a crucial mistake passing on Luka Doncic. And they did so for multiple reasons. The first and most obvious was how good Luka Doncic was playing. In his rookie year, he was averaging 21 points per game on 42% shooting from the field, 7.8 rebounds, and 6 assists per game. Just phenomenal numbers. But even besides the numbers, when you watched Luka out there play early on into his rookie season, it was very apparent that this guy was a generational type talent. The scoring ability that he had was on another level. From that 3-point range, he had a really nice ability to cross over into a 3-point jump shot, sidestep, and step back. From that mid-range area, he had a really nice pull-up mid-range jump shot, as well as a post turnaround fadeaway, due to the phenomenal footwork that he did have, alongside with the fact that his jump shot form was pretty high up above his face. He also had a phenomenal ability to drive all the way to the basket by finishing around defenders with crafty layups, or even having the ability to posterize some players from time to time, although he didn't do it all that often. But besides his phenomenal scoring ability, he had a really nice ability to pass and play make. He had a great understanding of NBA defenses and NBA offenses. He had a great basketball IQ overall, and it was just very apparent that Luka Doncic was going to be a star out there. So of course that's the first and most obvious reason for why the Kings made a mistake. But the next reason has to do with Marvin Bagley. So in Marvin's rookie season, he certainly did put up some pretty good numbers, averaging around 15 points per game on 50% shooting from the field, 7.6 rebounds, and 1 assist. But even besides the numbers, whenever you just watched Marvin out there, it was pretty clear that he was a solid player out there. He wasn't necessarily anything special, but he was just solid. But obviously Marvin was a very young player out there that had the potential to improve as the years did progress, so the expectation and hope for Marvin was he would continue to improve his game until he eventually got to the point where he was an all-star type guy, or maybe even a little bit better. But unfortunately for Marvin and the Kings, his rookie season ended up being his best season. In his second season, his numbers did go down across the board, but at the same time he basically put up the same statistics that he did in his rookie year in his second year. In his third year, his numbers went down a little bit. In his fourth year, his numbers really went down. And of course, the Kings ended up moving on from Marvin Bagley and traded him to the Detroit Pistons. Now, even if Luka Doncic wasn't in that year's draft, this still would be a disappointment for number 2 overall selection. Because of course, even though Marvin did put up decent numbers in his first and second year, they were only decent. And when you're drafting a guy with the number 2 overall selection, you're expecting a franchise type player. And that means at the very least an all-star type guy, which Marvin really wasn't that close to. But when you compound the fact that Luka was in that year's draft, and not only did the Kings pass up on a generational talent like Luka, but they didn't even get a really good player at that number 2 overall selection, and a player that's not even on the team anymore, now you're talking about a catastrophic mistake. Now of course, as I mentioned, it wasn't completely obvious that the Kings should have selected Luka Doncic with that number 2 overall selection, especially considering they already had De'Aaron Fox, who they were very high on, and rightfully so. he's obviously a very good player. Obviously nowhere near the level of Luka Doncic, but still at the time he was seen as a really good player and still is. But after Luka's first season, it was pretty apparent that the Kings made a pretty big mistake. But especially now, 3 or 4 years later, it's extremely apparent that the Kings made such a humongous mistake. Now obviously hindsight is 2020, but if the Kings did select Luka Doncic with that number 2 overall selection, they then could have traded away De'Aaron Fox for a decent return, and then they just could have built around Luka and been a much better team than they are currently. But obviously it's very easy for me to say something like that 3 or 4 years later, when at the time it wasn't necessarily an easy decision. But for the Kings, obviously it was a mistake that they made in the past, and they can't do anything about it at this point. But what they could do is they could continue to improve their overall roster that they have currently. Even though they didn't get Luka, they still have a pretty nice young core at this point of De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Davion Mitchell, and some other nice players they have on the roster. Now it was kind of interesting, at least in my opinion, that they traded away Tyrese Halliburton, because I thought he was a really nice piece to that Sacramento Kings lineup, but nonetheless they still have a pretty nice roster at this point, and they just got pretty lucky in the NBA draft lottery, as they do have the number 2 overall selection in this year's draft. So hopefully for their sake they can draft effectively and draft a player that can be a franchise guy for them going forward. But even besides this year's draft, just continue to draft effectively throughout the years. In free agency, bring in some nice players that would complement the players that you already have in your core. Also find the right management in the front office, find the right head coach, find nice assistant coaches, and if you're able to do all those things effectively, even though they made a catastrophic mistake by not drafting Luka Doncic, they could still make a pretty nice team out of what they have currently. So hopefully for the Sacramento Kings sake, they're able to do a lot of the things that I said in this video effectively, and they're able to turn themselves into a perennial playoff team and a team that's very attractive to free agents, bring in some nice free agents, and just turn their team into a really good one long term. But for Luka Doncic, obviously him and the Dallas Mavericks are currently in the Western Conference Finals against the Golden State Warriors in a very difficult matchup, so hopefully for their sake they're able to win this series. But one thing that I will say is I didn't necessarily think the Mavs were going to beat the Phoenix Suns, so the fact that they did surprise a lot of people and beat the Suns last round would give you some belief that maybe they would be able to do the same thing against the Golden State Warriors. Because going into this series, and especially at this point, a lot of people think the Warriors are probably going to win. But if I've learned one thing over the years about Luka Doncic, is you can never count his teams out in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens in that series going forward as well. But overall, the Sacramento Kings passing up on Luka Doncic has to be one of the worst moves made in a very, very long time. And that's including all the poor or interesting moves that the Kings have made in the past, and also including a bunch of other teams that made poor decisions. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Sacramento Kings passing up on Luka Doncic in favor of Marvin Bagley was one of the worst moves made in some time now, or do you think it's a little overblown? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out guys.